Your interpretation of the event that happened is a map that you created, not the territory of objective reality. A Google map with a filter set for breakfast near me shows a representation of the territory that's different than the territory itself. The filter results in distortions in that certain aspects of the territory are emphasized and others are ignored. And nobody really believes that such maps portray the world as it really is. Only a map where 1 inch represents 1 inch could do that. The purpose of a map is to summarize and filter an overwhelming amount of data into a form that helps the user. Yelp, Google, and other mapping systems compete over whose filters have the greatest utility. The distortions produced by these maps are not bugs, they're features. You would choose Yelp over Google if you thought that Yelp's way of filtering the data would be better at helping you find, say, a good, cheap Asian restaurant. However, if it repeatedly led you to choose restaurants you hated, you'd probably stop using it and try a different mapping system. But Mimi is using a map that repeatedly leads her to bad outcomes. But she resists considering another way to filter the data, because she assumes that her interpretation of the event that happened isn't just an interpretation. It's what happened. Naturally, Mimi is unaware that her way of looking at things, or lens, distorts her interpretation in the same way that you forget that you're wearing eyeglasses until you take them off and realize they've been altering your vision all along. But from our perspective, as dispassionate researchers, we can see there are other ways to interpret the events that happened, and her interpretation is just how things look to someone with Mimi's biological predispositions and psychological history. And this is why these puzzles are so fiendishly difficult to solve. You can't see the lenses that are distorting your interpretations because you're looking through them. And outsiders who want to help solve the problem don't have access to the filters responsible for it. And so their well-intentioned advice tends to add insult to injury. And so when you hear someone who you're trying to help say, "You just don't understand," they're probably right. The only way to access the knowledge that will enable you to govern yourself is to observe cause and effect from both the observer's perspective and from the first-person perspective. For example, in Mimi's case, we as observers can see that her interpretation is biased and just one among many possible interpretations of the triggering event. But we as observers only have access to how the event looked from our dispassionate perspective, not how it felt from Mimi's first-person perspective. Naturally, the effective cause of Mimi's response was not how it looked to us, but how she experienced it. Cause becomes effect in the space between the stimulus and response, and only Mimi is in a position to watch that process unfold. To know herself well enough to govern herself, Mimi will have to understand from both the observer's perspective, how it looks from the outside, and from the first-person perspective, how it feels from the inside. So to review, Mimi, you, and I would probably react differently to the same nominal stimulus. Our particular reactions would be determined by how each of us interpreted the event that happened. And so our search for the effective cause of your unwanted reaction began by exploring how you interpreted the nominal stimulus. And now that you've completed your first research trial, we can examine the space between the stimulus and the response, which is documented in the middle column. So let's look at what you've written there to help us understand how your psyche interprets the things that happen and how it reacts to that interpretation. I'm using this collaborative terminology of we and us to emphasize that our researcher's perspective gives us a different understanding of the episode than your first-person experience of it gave you when it happened. So our 3-column data sheet should show a description of an event that happened in the leftmost column and your response to it in the rightmost column. And in the space between the stimulus and your response is your subjective experience, including how you interpreted the event that happened. This information is only available to you, and without this critical data, it is impossible to understand cause and effect. Behavioral psychologists can observe the stimulus and response, but only you have access to what goes on in the space between. When Socrates advised you to know yourself, this space between the stimulus and response is where that knowledge resides. The 3-column data sheet we've been using promotes collaboration between the psychologist who dispassionately observes how you react to the things that happen and the phenomenologist who observes what happens in the space between the stimulus and response. To know yourself, you have to collect data on cause and effect from both perspectives. And as you do, your understanding of what causes you to react as you do will continue to grow. For example, as you collect data on the nominal and effective causes of your unwanted reactions, you may notice that the same interpretations keep showing up in the middle column. The relationship between the second and third columns gives you insights into why you react as you do. And we'll get into the implications of this knowledge later. But the key that unlocks your puzzle is the relationship between the first and second column. Why do you reliably interpret these kinds of events in the negative ways that you do? To return to the Mimi example, her premise that she is not lovable influences her interpretations of Jerry's actions. The same lens has had a similar effect on her interpretation of the actions of her former lovers. Now consider the parallel with Google Map filters. If I were to look at the map and see that it highlighted cheap Asian restaurants, I'd realize that I failed to reset the filters. Since setting these filters is a conscious action, recognizing the map's distortion and understanding its cause is not considered a great insight. But solving your puzzle does require you to do something exceptional. You didn't consciously set the filters that determine how you interpret the things that happen. Those filters were set by your biology and personal history, and are always filtering your perception, so you're not conscious of them. To react adaptively in a rapidly changing environment, you have to assume that you see things as they really are. From the first-person perspective, there are no lenses distorting your understanding of what you see. You are not aware of any filters that favor some interpretations of the event at the expense of others. However, when you look back on the event dispassionately, as you complete this 3-column data sheet, you can see things from a different perspective. What you are blind to from the first-person perspective, you can see from the observer's perspective. And after you've done a few of these 3-column analyses, you'll have a pretty good idea of how the nominal stimulus looks from the first-person perspective, and how it looks from the third-person perspective. And so you'll complement your personal experience of the crisis with the insights of a dispassionate researcher. And this collaboration between your phenomenological experience of the space between the stimulus and the response and your psychological observations of that same space is how you come to know yourself well enough to govern yourself. So in the next course, The exploration of your personal experience will take you to the realm of volition. You'll be invited to explore some ancient and modern methods to intentionally influence the phenomena you experience. As you become familiar with the process of working with subjective phenomena, you'll be developing the practical skills to cope with the crises and high-risk situations you're bound to encounter. This ability to influence your subjective experience, combined with your understanding of what goes on in the space between the stimulus and your response to it, can free you from recurring patterns of self-sabotage, despite the stresses and temptations that would motivate you to defect.